Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Sarah. Welcome to the latest episode of my podcast and YouTube video, where I have the pleasure of interviewing Sarah Rose Bright. And I would love to just say a few words about Sarah before we get going to put in context how I have come to know Sarah and count her as one of my dearest friends and a very valued colleague. So Sarah is a sex, pleasure and intimacy coach with a huge range of experience. And she's one of the most phenomenal women that I know, hands down, and is somebody that within our friendship holds me accountable, holds me to my highest integrity. And I really know that I can go and work things out and talk things through, which is exactly what you want from somebody who is invested in coaching and is really trying to help others work through their stuff as well. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, plus a lot of fun that we have.
We really do have a lot of fun. So Sarah and I, we do a lot of work together, and we've run various retreats, events, one-off events, weekend, longer ones, moving towards week-long retreats, all with a focus around sexuality, the breath, shamanism, and Sarah's practices of Qigong and other ways of incorporating basically what are embodied healing practices so that people can go beyond their story. And in the path of that work that we've done together, I'm sure you'll agree that this is true, Sarah, what we come to notice is that if you're working with energy, energy is just energy. All energy rises up and can be experienced or re-experienced in the body, because I see the body as a kind of somatic library. And we began to notice that for many people, obviously, because I believe, I'm sure, again, you'll agree, but sexuality and sexual expression is one of the biggest areas of our, I call it our shadow theatre. It's where all of our stuff gets dumped and locked away. And of course, it's an energy that wants to arise, wants to heal, wants to find its voice, wants to find freedom. And when we do our work, we began to notice, I noticed separately in my breath work, and obviously this is the basis of your work, so you'll see it a lot, that people often don't know whether that's okay, where to go with that energy. They will feel maybe similar feelings to those that they may have felt in the first instance, which are usually connected with that unholy trio of guilt, fear, and shame. So I don't know if you want to say anything to start off about what really inspires you in your work and why we've come together to start opening this discussion up to raise more awareness and bring it to light and basically give it that voice.
Yeah, thank you. There's a huge amount there. So what inspires me is bringing this stuff out of the shadows. And it's not just the sexual expression in the form of shame and judgment. It's also the sexual expression in terms of just sharing that aspect of ourselves, because we're born sexual beings. We die sexual beings. We're sexual beings 24/7. But the taboo around that is just so phenomenal. And so what really inspires me is creating spaces to have conversations around this aspect in a way that people can ask questions and speak and share. You know, when I'm working with people, people often share things they've never shared with anyone before. And it's so liberating and so phenomenal to share those things. And I know from my journey, it certainly was as well. And it's such an honor as well.
Yeah.
And so what we were talking about around the breath, where you're noticing that people come into your breathwork sessions and then afterwards emailing you with questions about, is it okay to feel aroused in the session, or I felt shame and different things. You know, that started us with a conversation about breath and sexuality, because they're so phenomenally important and interlinked.
Yeah, they really are. And you know what you just pointed to there when you're talking about the things that people kind of put away and squash back down, that can manifest itself in any aspect of what people lock away. Their fear of speaking their truth, their fear of being in integrity, their fear of stating what is true for them, because we're so we're so conditioned into a world that kind of idealizes romance, idealizes relationship, idealizes what good sex should look like. And I've had so many like inspiring, fascinating conversations with you about, you know, what makes amazing sex, and it's not what we think it is, and how we build what is basically intimacy. And I'd go so far as to say, you know, that starts with intimacy with ourselves, with starting to trust ourselves, because so many of us, when we've grown up, have been shamed from a very early age about the natural desire to explore our bodies.
Yep.
You see children in their natural environment and they're just juicy and joyful and expressive and curious. And of course that's going to extend to their own body, because there's so many pleasure receptors in this beautiful body. I'm only just rediscovering mine, for goodness sake, you know, like 6 decades later. And I'm like, oh, hang on. Where did all that go? Like, why was that shut down? Because it's somebody else's story about what they think about sex or pleasure. So, as you said, there's been quite a lot of inquiry in my breathwork sessions where people have either experienced that energy arising and then felt they'd have to squash it back down because it was too embarrassing or awkward or uncomfortable, or, oh, I'm in a different process. This is about the breath. I'm not supposed to be feeling arousal. So maybe we should talk a little bit about what arousal is and how that links to any feelings of pleasure and what we can do with that so that we don't have to keep squashing it back down.
Well, arousal is just a natural, healthy response in the body to life. You know, you look at the word arousal. Food can be arousing, a conversation can be arousing, all sorts of things can be arousing, and our body responds with our pleasure sort of receptors and sensations that feel good. We don't know how to be with us when our body responds sort of sexually in our culture. If we can't act on it in that moment, and that's a sort of should, that we should do something with it, then we just repress it or we hide it. We don't have, you know, in the tantrikas, the Taoists would see our sexual energy, our arousal is just our life force flowing through us. And that arousal might inspire us to paint a painting or do something really creative, as well as it might inspire us to be intimate with somebody, to feel pleasure in our bodies. But we just don't have any reference points for it because our sexuality is not integrated into our beingness. It's seen as something that just happens in relation with another and happens in private spaces. And we just don't have positive role models. Who has really healthy role models when it comes to sexuality, where sexuality is lived in a healthy way in the day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I can honestly say that I think that the first time I ever had a healthy role model in regards to my sexuality was when I went to Los Angeles to the huge conference there, where there were many people who were working in the sex industry, and I'm including coaches and providers and judges and legal services and performers and all aspects of what you might call the sex industry involves. And that was the first time I'd ever seen really empowered people owning their bodies, owning their gender identities, rejecting kind of conformity or being stuck in a box or being given a label. And it was mind-blowing for me. And how old was I then? I'd had my children, they were both young, so I must have been in my early 30s. You know, that's quite shocking, really, because along the way, as you know, and I won't go into that now, but I'd had so many other experiences around sexuality. And coming into my body has been a really difficult thing for me to do. It's been a huge part of my life's work. And yet, what you said a moment ago about how arousal can relate to anything, it is that creative force. But the other issue that I'd love to bring in here that relates to that is when arousal is very specifically a sexual arousal, and we know that is, and we're feeling desire, and we may be partnered, we may not be partnered, the desire still exists, we still feel it. But we then don't have really great role models for healthy boundaries or how to set them or how to ask for what we want.
Yeah.
And so this conversation that we're starting to open up, and, you know, I'm really excited to say that we're going to be offering an event very soon that's specifically focusing around breathwork and sexuality and how we can invite that space. And in that process, I know that we're going to have to navigate conversations around boundaries.
Yep.
Because as you often say, which I think is great, you know, you don't get great at anything without practicing. And that includes exercising boundaries or asking for what we want. It might be clumsy. It might be awkward. And again, there's an opportunity for shame to flare up. Oh my God, I got it wrong. Oh my God, I can't believe I said that. So we really have to learn how to forgive ourselves in this process and to be vulnerable, don't we?
Yeah, and to be able to make mistakes. You know, if you're going to learn to play a musical instrument or you learn a sport, you have at times when you feel clumsy, you feel incompetent, but you have that learner's mindset that you also know there's times when you're just going to have that breakthrough and have that amazing experience and take yourself to the next level. And when it comes to sex, we don't have a culture of practice. It's like there's so many myths. And one of the most biggest ones is that sex is almost like this automatic function that should just happen effortlessly. And that we should just be able to show up in the bedroom and produce a full performance and not have any rehearsal time or practice time, not even speak about it with each other. And actually, you know, the research shows and that creating a great sex life involves the willingness to make mistakes, the willingness to try things out, the willingness for those things to not work, the willingness to show up and ask for what we want, to get to know what we want.
I'm so glad to hear that, because the number of mistakes I have made, and I don't really see things anymore, as you know, as a mistake, but I totally get what you're talking about, that there's that awkwardness. Because when we first meet somebody, or we first find that place in ourselves, even, you know, even touching ourselves, starting there with our own self-pleasure. I used to hate that word, but I'm becoming more comfortable with it because I now relate it much more to intimacy with myself or intimacy with another. But there's so many times when those kind of situations that you're talking about, where we might feel that we've got something wrong or made a mistake, or we're being touched in a way that we don't like and we don't know how to stop that, and then we'll feel guilty about it, that basically we kind of recontract, don't we? We go back into that place of, I knew it wasn't safe, and so I'm going back into my own world, or, you know, I'll just stay with this compromised feeling of the fact that actually I feel that there's more pleasure that I could be having or should be having. And again, you know, should, not such a great word, but there are times when it's really applicable.
Oh, totally. And we learn to tolerate touch from a very early age. You know, people touch us, family members, you know, even just like the uncle,
give us a kiss,
giving a hug, and, you know, there's no choice. We're not raised around, does this feel good? And do I have a yes or a no for this? And so many people I work with know what they don't want, but they don't know what they do want. And communication is a very triggering place, because, for example, if I say, this isn't working for me, or I've tried this out and I feel a bit daft, it's not worked.
Yeah.
You know, it's not there's anything wrong with me, or there's nothing wrong with the person. It's just things take practice, and we need to learn how to find a language for that. But so many people find that don't have a language for it. So having practice time to explore and get to know each other's bodies and find ways of saying, oh, how does this feel? Or what would make this even better? There's lots of language that we can use that generates more curiosity and more exploration, rather than some of the not saying anything, or people taking things very personally when they get feedback in sex, because it's the most intimate place where we share ourselves, well, one of the most intimate.
Yeah, there's a bit of a paradox there, isn't there? Because on the one hand, it takes great self-awareness to not take things personally. You know, I work with shamanic practice, and if you look at somebody like Miguel Ruiz, 4 agreements, you know, one of the fundamental agreements is not to take things personally. And it's so difficult because it can be hurtful, and people may have more or less skill in the delivery of those negotiations or those expressions. Again, you know, even communication is a skill that we have to learn. Like you said, people don't know how to ask for what they want, or to state very clearly that they're not enjoying something. And this has been something that's also come to my attention through the breathwork sessions, where that energy of arousal has come up because we're breathing and enlivening and awakening the body, and we're not separate from that. We are holistic beings of energy. And so, of course, things come up and they arise. And then I've had men in my in-person sessions say all they want to do is connect to their genitals and put their hand there. And it's like, oh my God, I can't do that. I know Steph, she's going to think I'm being weird. A lot of men have expressed in particular that when they connect with their sexuality in a group space or where there are women present, they feel that they might be being deemed as predatory, that it's inappropriate. And so they kind of rein in their own expression of the masculine, and there's a wounding there. And I really see it in my breathwork circles with men. And then for women, it can be the opposite, that there's this lack of permission to even be bold and expressive and bawdy and orgasmic and all of these things that are really a deep and profound connection to the very essence of who we are. And I mean, this is your work, you know this, but I feel that there is so much unpicking to do in this area.
Yeah.
So much, you know. I very rarely see people. I've gone through a ton of embodiment practices and things like 5 rhythms, movement practices, standard traditional massage and body work. Of course, we need to be talking about boundaries, ethics, and consent when it comes to touch and intention and purpose. But there's a certain kind of like we'll just ignore that aspect of our being, which means that when it does arise, there's really very few platforms that people can go to, because maybe they don't want to go and just immerse themselves in a full-on tantra experience where maybe everybody is more comfortable with sexuality if they're not at that point yet. You know, we can be working with very small but significant changes in somebody's life that can make a huge difference. So I feel that this dialogue needs to come more into the mainstream and needs to come into these modalities. And at the same time, I'm aware, because it would be like having an awful conversation, or an awkward one rather, with your parents, that if the space holder is not comfortable in talking about these things, then there can be a real awkwardness that comes into the room. So it's not necessarily easy, is it? And this is where the benefit of wisdom, experience, and training comes in, which I think is why it's really important to connect in with people like yourself, for whom this is your career. This is your specialism. You know how to answer things in many ways a lot better than I do in these areas.
I think that's a good point that you've raised about the fact that if you're holding space, you know, it's really important to, if this aspect of your life is something you're uncomfortable with, then of course that's going to show up on some level, and there's going to be a sort of a unspoken, there's going to be no conversation about this. And you don't need to be an expert. It's just about permission that this is okay, this area of life, because it is such a natural area of our lives, but we just don't have healthy education and modeling and everything. And I've known people who've come to me and they've been to therapy sessions every week for 7 years, and the therapist has never mentioned sex because the therapist was uncomfortable about it. So there's so many spaces where the subject of sexuality is taboo because we just don't know how to talk about it, or we're not comfortable talking about it. You know, I've worked with doctors who have trouble talking about it with their patients, yet often that's the place where people go when they've got sexual problems. And we were talking earlier about, for example, in terms of, you know, an arousal. And for example, when men experience arousal, if they're in some sort of public setting, that arousal is very visible in the form of an erection. And I've had so many men talk to me over the years about they've been for a massage, and just a straight massage, and they found that they've got an erection and just felt so embarrassed about it. Or they have been dating and they've held somebody's hand and had an erection, or and then that's maybe, or stop them wanting to go dating, or stop them, they've just felt such shame around it, and that there must be something wrong with them because this is happening. But actually erections are just a common healthy response of the body, and obviously there's a level of appropriateness,
but we may be having the same feelings, you know, we may be aroused, we may be sexually aroused, but of course that's not visible, and so it's a safer area in which to be, really. And you know, I think that I think there's been so much damage done over the years around kind of ideals and archetypes of what men should be like, and what women should be like, and what sex should be like, and what relationship should be like, that, you know, it's really, really vast, and it would be easy to get overwhelmed by that. But the reason that this is now coming in more and more into my work with breathwork, you know, beyond how we work together and linking back into my work with you and wanting to bring that dialogue in, is one, I want somebody who's trained and experienced, in the same way that if I go to a breathworker, I want somebody who's trained and experienced and can hold that space. But also because almost without fail, the inquiries that have come to me recently have been saying, I had to put my camera off, I felt deep shame. And, you know, fair enough, some people might choose not to have that visible, but they still don't know if that's normal, because those messages and those programmings about don't touch yourself, leave yourself alone, that's shameful, hide, we contract the breath, we contract the experience, we rush through it because maybe we've had to do it under the covers or in a darkened room or quickly when nobody's looking. And so we don't know how to get into these beautiful bodies and find that connection with the breath and with our sensual, creative energy. So what might be some ways that you could imagine, just simple, easy ways in, or, you know, I mean, I'm exploring this together with you, really, but just thinking about in terms of how we would bring that into a space. I feel that, I think perhaps the intention is key, you know, that there's an impeccability about the space holding, and that there's a strong intention that this breathwork session, or this session that we're going to do together, is created to open that dialogue. So everybody comes under no illusion that it's like, oh, nobody else is feeling this, I'm not sure if that's normal, because we're actually inviting it into the space in a held way.
And that's the problem, is that question, am I normal? I'm asked so many times, because often there's nobody we can check that with. So if, for example, something's happened with our health, I mean, even there's areas that can evoke shame. But if there's something happening in different areas of our lives, we usually have somebody to pick the phone up or check in with, and is that okay to feel that? Or what do you think about that? But when it comes to sex, so many people, even if they've got really great friendships and they've been through years of friendship and talk about all sorts of things, sex can still be the one that's left off the table, still be the subject, still be the taboo. And so I think what I would really invite is, you know, permission to ask these questions. Because if you have the question, I can pretty much guarantee there'll be one or more other people that have that same question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, for sure. So to ask it.
I guess that's the point, isn't it? It's about normalizing things, and there may be things that people have preferences for that are vastly different within that range of normal. In fact, it probably doesn't even help to call it normal.
It's normal.
It's like,
there is no such thing as normality. One of my teachers says, when it comes to sexuality, our sexuality is different as our fingerprints. Yet I'd say it's more different than that, because our fingerprint is set for life and our sexuality is actually very fluid. And I think the archetypes of of gender, of sexual orientation, of sexual expression are infinite, and we are just given such narrow stereotypes with which to operate in. And so much of this is, and this is where I think breathwork is so amazing, is about unlearning. It's like we have to unlearn the programming and the conditioning that we've been raised with. You know, whether that's shame, whether that's not being able to ask for what we want, whether it's the contraction in the body, which a lot of people learn when it comes to sex. You know, often we learn our first sexual experiences through masturbation, which happens quickly and quietly under the covers so we don't get caught. So we contract from an early age, and we've maybe had shaming experiences. Everybody has a story to tell around their sexual childhood and youth. Everybody.
Or even adulthood.
And adulthood for sure.
Yeah.
But
people being named
stories.
or labeled, you know. I mean, I've been called horrible names in anger, you know, when a relationship is throwing up problems, and these were meant to be, you know, long-term loving relationships, but when the problems come up and the energy gets inflamed, you know, often the insults that will get thrown will be, you know, you're a slut, or you're frigid, or you're this, or you're that, or you're you know, for men it might be different again, but it will often be that's where the place will go for the jugular. That's the place that people will go for it, around sexuality and intimacy, you know, that, oh, but there's nothing there. And again, it's kind of like, well, yes, I mean, you know, life throws up a multitude of experiences that we have the opportunity to learn from, but there are some in which and with which it's much easier to find the help that you want, the support you want, the dialogue that you want. And, you know, just referring back again, I honestly was dancing 5 rhythms for 20 years and probably only heard buttocks, breasts and genitals mentioned in the whole body that we go through. Find how that part wants to move, feel what's in there. And I've had so many conversations about that, and I understand some of them, because for some teachers what they'll say, and this has value to a degree, is when we bring that into the space, it can really deeply affect somebody. And because some of these processes aren't like a psychotherapeutic process where there's ongoing support or resources, there's a fear of opening something up and then leaving somebody with that energy. And yet, not acknowledging it, I think, can do as much damage as finding just comfortable, straightforward ways to even begin to name those body parts.
Oh my gosh, it's like I if we don't bring this into the space, the amount of women I've worked with that don't have a name for their own genitals, that, you know, and these are women in their 30s,
and you're not
40s,
talking
50s.
about frou-frou or Lady Garden.
No, they don't have anything.
Right.
So it just creates this invisibility. How can you ask for your pleasure if you haven't got a name that you feel comfortable asking about? And I think, you know, I've had some conversations with yoga teachers as well, where, for example, you know, I've got a couple of amazing yoga teachers that I've spoke to, where they will, when they're doing yin yoga and stuff, will mention things like relaxing the genitals, relaxing and bringing the body parts in. And for me, one of the things I get feedback about a lot is that I can talk about things like the genitals just as like I'm talking about what I'm going to cook for dinner. There's just no charge around it. And so what people find is, when they hear me say it like that, it reframes something for them. It's like, oh, okay, it's not as scary. Because I mean, when I started doing this work, I couldn't even say any of those words without stuttering and blushing. So and it starts to just make it natural and everyday, because our sexuality is such an incredibly beautiful part of us. It is our life force. It is so powerful. It's so important, not just for our sexual pleasure, but it's important for our health and our vitality, for our creativity, for our radiance, for our longevity. There's just, you know, as the Taoists and Tantrikas have known for years and centuries.
What about for those people for whom that's not the case, where sexuality has been fraught with pain, abuse and suffering? How do we begin to open the dialogue so that there's a reclamation of that energy? Because that is our pure and natural state, and that's our birthright. You know, we often hear people talk about pleasure being our birthright. How do we open up the dialogue so that we're not just looking on the, oh, you know, anybody can do this, everybody's got to a right to it, and it's in there somewhere, when other people maybe have an awful lot to work through to get to that place?
But even for the people who have had, for example, a lot of trauma, that trauma hasn't come from a reference point of sexuality being healthy, natural, and something to be celebrated. So that's true. Seeing that reframe even there, because maybe that's all somebody's known, is sex has been terrifying, toxic,
Yeah.
all sorts of different things. So it's just seeing that there's another version of that out there,
Yeah.
can start to have a glimpse of something different. And, you know, I have seen when it's a sexual healing journey after trauma and abuse, it can take time, and it really can take time.
Mm.
But I have seen miracles happen, and, you know, totally have seen that actually in time it is possible to reclaim your body. Absolutely. And a healthy sex life 100% for yourself.
100%,
you know?
I agree.
And I think it's important to say that, because many people come to me where they've had years of therapy, for example, and who don't see that as a possibility.
Yeah.
So so they may have some cognitive understanding of it, but feeling it in the body is a whole different thing.
Oh my God, that's music to my ears, because also that's where breathwork comes in. But I love that you have said that there's this opportunity for reframing, because, you know, we don't know what we don't know. We can't see what we can't see. And if we've never had that experience, to have, it doesn't matter if somebody goes, I don't believe you at first, or I don't feel that's possible, because people have come to me in my work and say, oh, you know, Steph, you're doing really well, and you're living your dream, and you're following your path, and everything seems balanced, and I'm just ready to give up. And I go, do you think, you know, this is like 30, 40 years of commitment. It's the journey, it's the path. But when I look at where I was and the trauma I was carrying to where I am and the relationship I have with my body, that's because of that willingness to actually just hold on to that reframing that you've just talked about, that light, you know, hang on a minute. If they can do that, and if that's possible, that must be possible. It must happen. It must happen for people. If it can happen for them, surely it can happen for me. Maybe I either need to be patient, find the right person, or open the dialogue in spaces like this.
And say that wherever you are is not to judge yourself, to think there's something broken or wrong. You know, 100%, I don't believe anybody is, you know, I've had many people say I'm broken, I need fixing, all these different things, damaged goods, which just breaks my heart to hear, because it's just 100% not true. And I see so many people feeling where they are is not good enough, that, you know, all of these different things that we've talked about. And actually, even if we're on a healing journey, that it will take the time it takes, and to learn to be with where we are, and to really celebrate every time we make a step, to celebrate, you know, where we are and who we are, as well as holding the vision of what's possible. And, you know, because so many people think they're not going to be okay till they get to this magical point, which never exists. And how do we find that okay in ourselves right now?
Yeah, and you know, I know that both of us have received messages after our retreats, after our weekends, after our events, where people have said, that moment at that retreat changed my life.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's about people, showing up and knowing that there is always possible. I mean, I'm thinking of people now that are coming into my head, and the transformation that we've witnessed with those people, from wanting to flee and get out of a room and not being able to say a word in a sharing circle, to being really like, oh my gosh, you know, coming back a second time, a third time, a fourth time. And the transformation and the changes are so visible on every level, because of course, I love this saying that we both love, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And therefore, when you make changes in one area, it tends to ripple into all areas of our life.
Yeah.
It ripples into our work, our relationships, our relationship with ourselves, our family, our loved ones, our bodies. And just to bring it back to what you said before, it's all about the embodiment. I know you use practices. You're not just about coaching in the mind and in the head. You have a lot of embodied practices that you give to people, which after we finish the recording and when the podcast airs, we will link people to, so that they can find out more about your work, and they can find out more about our work. And of course, an open invitation for people to come and join our breathwork session, which is going to happen in a couple of weeks' time. And we are going to be holding the container for the exploration and diving into what's in there, what needs to be felt and what needs to be spoken. Yeah. So on that note, Sarah, I really want to thank you as always for your insight and your wisdom. And you take inquiries from people, they can find you on your website. Any other ways that you like people to contact you and reach out?
Yeah, reach out by my website. I've got we'll put the links into like my YouTube channel and different things where I'm producing more and more content of just really good information that can help. And always feel free to reach out, even if I'm not the right person, because this is such a taboo area still. I'll always help people with resources and referrals, because you know, just not to, if it's a fear of reaching out, really encourage you to take that step, because often with this work, it's, you know, absolutely the hardest step to take. So I'm just really looking forward to creating an incredible event with you again, when we explore sexuality and breathwork, because it's such an incredible combination. And it's one that's often not seen together, you know, because when I work with people, one of the first things that I'll do is we explore the breath, because it affects everything. I'm sure we'll talk about that more at the workshop, in terms of how we experience our bodies and our pleasure. So
yeah, well, it was in my exploration of Tantra as part of my healing journey when I first even heard about that connection of breath, movement, voice, that we use the breath to connect with the movement, to create the movement, to give it voice, and to start really deepening that unwinding, if you like, and opening into this sense of what's possible for healing, for feeling, for rewiring and reclaiming. So yeah, like you, I'm really looking forward to this event, and I hope it really sparks an open dialogue that people can then feel that they have somewhere to go with these energies, these questions, and these practices. So yeah, once again, thank you, Sarah.
thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure as always, and I look forward to connecting with you very, very soon.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.